I came home at 6:17 on a Tuesday, my laptop bag digging into my shoulder, my heels clicking against the front porch I had swept myself just 3 nights earlier, and my key didn't fit my own front door. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. I stood there for a second, staring at the lock like it had personally insulted me. Then I tried again. Slower this time. The metal scraped. Stopped. Refused. I pulled the key out and looked at it, as if somehow the key I had used every single day for 3 years had transformed in my purse between the office and my driveway. It hadn't. The brass on the deadbolt looked different. Shinier. New. I felt that strange, hollow shift in my stomach, the one that comes right before your brain catches up to what your body already knows. Something was wrong. My house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Maple Glen, the kind of suburban street where people watered their hydrangeas before dinner and waved from behind neatly trimmed hedges. That evening, no one waved. Mrs. Parker from across the street was standing in her kitchen window, pretending to wipe down the counter while very obviously watching me. The Parker's blinds moved on the left. Across the driveway, someone's garage door paused halfway down. The whole street knew something I didn't. I set my tote bag down and looked at the lock more carefully. Fresh screws. A new faceplate. No fingerprints except the faint smudge of recent installation. Then I saw the cardboard in my trash bin by the porch steps, an empty package from a hardware store, the label still half attached. Deadbolt set. Satin brass. I stopped breathing for half a beat. My phone buzzed in my hand. At first I thought it was Ethan finally texting me back. It wasn't. It was my doorbell camera app, delayed from poor signal at the office, loading a motion alert from 12:42 p.m. I tapped it. The footage opened in silence first, then sound caught up. A white van with lock and key services on the side rolled into my driveway. A man in a navy work shirt stepped out carrying a red toolbox. And right behind him, in cream slacks and oversized sunglasses, walking up my front steps like she paid the mortgage herself, was my mother-in-law, Diane Bennett. She didn't knock. Of course she didn't. She just pointed at the front door with the kind of confidence that only comes from a woman who has spent years mistaking access for authority. I watched her smile at the locksmith. Watched him kneel. Watched him remove my lock from my front door in broad daylight while I sat in a budget meeting 20 miles away, answering emails and thinking the biggest problem in my life was whether I'd make it home in time to defrost chicken for dinner. My hand tightened around my phone so hard my wedding ring bit into my skin. I replayed the clip once. Twice. On the third time, Diane turned just enough for the camera to catch her face. Calm. Composed. Certain. Like she wasn't breaking into someone else's life. Like she was restoring order. That was the moment I understood this wasn't some misunderstanding, not a repair, not a surprise, not one of her usual boundary-stomping little performances disguised as concern. My mother-in-law had changed the locks on my house while I was at work. What she didn't know, what made me set my bag down, straighten my shoulders, and smile for the first time that evening, was that Diane Bennett had changed the wrong locks. Instead of pounding on the door or calling the police in a panic, I did what Diane had never once expected me to do. I stood still. I picked up my tote bag from the porch, set it neatly on the wicker chair by the front window, and watched the footage one more time. There is a certain kind of woman who mistakes noise for power. Diane had spent the better part of 6 years believing that if she arrived loudly enough, rearranged enough, commented enough, inserted herself enough, eventually everyone would start treating her opinions like law. She had never understood me because I was the opposite. I did not raise my voice. I made lists. I kept records. I remembered details. And Diane Bennett had given me a very expensive one. I turned off the camera replay and leaned against the porch railing, the evening air cool against my skin, carrying the smell of cut grass and someone grilling burgers 3 houses down. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Mailboxes. Flagstone paths. Porch lights beginning to blink on in the blue hour. But suddenly I could see the pattern that had been building for months, maybe longer. Diane had not started with the lock. Women like her never do. They begin with little trespasses so small that everyone tells you not to be dramatic. She had used her spare key to let herself in while I was at work and left a casserole in my refrigerator without asking. She had folded our laundry one Sunday while we were out, then laughed when I asked how she got inside. She had moved the framed photo from our honeymoon off the mantel and replaced it with a picture of Ethan at age 12 in a Little League uniform, smiling up at her like the world had not yet taught him how to disappoint women. Once, she reorganized my kitchen drawers because, in her words, the spatulas were in a ridiculous place. Another time, she boxed up winter scarves from the hall closet and said, with that soft little smile, that the entryway looked cluttered and she was only trying to help. Every time I pushed back, Ethan would do what he always did. He would sigh. Rub the back of his neck. Avoid my eyes. Claire, she means well. Claire, it is just easier if you let it go. Claire, she is my mother. As if those 4 words were a master key that opened every boundary she crossed. I used to believe marriage was supposed to build a home around 2 people. But somewhere in the last 3 years, our house had become a stage where I was expected to perform gratitude while Diane tested how much of my life she could touch without consequences. The lock was not the beginning. It was only the first time she had done something so bold that even Ethan would not be able to call it a misunderstanding. My phone lit up again in my hand. This time it was him. 1 missed call. Then a text. In a meeting. What is going on? I stared at the words and almost laughed. What is going on? As if I were the one with a locksmith on my porch at lunch. As if he did not already know enough to be nervous. Across the street, Mrs. Parker finally gave up pretending and stepped out onto her porch in pale pink gardening gloves. Claire? She called carefully. Honey, are you all right? I turned toward her and smiled the way women do when they are too angry to tremble. Not yet, I said. But I think I am about to be. I glanced at Ethan's message for 3 full seconds before I typed back exactly 4 words. Ask your mother, Ethan. Then I locked my phone screen and looked at Mrs. Parker across the street. Linda Parker had lived in Maple Glen long enough to know the difference between a delivery van and a family emergency, and judging by the careful way she was holding herself on that porch, she had already decided which one this was. She stepped down from her front stoop, still wearing those pale pink gloves, and crossed the street with the cautious dignity of a woman who had spent decades mastering the art of helping without making someone feel pitied. Up close, I could see she was trying very hard not to stare at the lock. I failed first. Did you see them? I asked. Linda gave the kind of tight nod that told me she had seen more than I was going to like. Around lunchtime, she said softly. I was trimming my roses. Your mother-in-law pulled up in that silver Mercedes of hers, the one with the vanity plate. She glanced toward the driveway as if Diane's car might still be there. She was with a locksmith. I thought maybe you lost your key or there was some kind of break-in. Then she looked at me, and her voice dropped lower. But she did not look worried, Claire. She looked pleased. The word settled into me like a stone. Pleased. Of course she had. Diane never looked more alive than when she believed she was rearranging someone else's life for their own good. Did she say anything? I asked. Linda hesitated, and that hesitation told me there was more. I waited. Eventually she exhaled and said, she waved when she saw me. Smiled and said, we are finally fixing a problem that should have been handled months ago. I let out one short laugh before I could stop myself. It sounded colder than I intended. Linda's face tightened. Honey, I am so sorry. I shook my head. Do not be. Then I looked at the front door again, the new brass gleaming under the porch light like a trophy. Actually, this might be the first honest thing she has done in years. Linda frowned, not understanding, but she did not ask. Good neighbors know when silence is part of the gift. My phone buzzed again. Ethan this time, not a text. A call. I answered on the second ring and said nothing. Claire, he began too quickly, his voice thin and breathless in that way it got when he was trying to sound calm and failing. My mother said there was some issue with the front lock and she was helping out. I closed my eyes for half a second. There it was. Not outrage. Not confusion. Not what do you mean she touched our house. Just the soft, spineless beginning of an excuse. A locksmith is not help, Ethan, I said. It is trespassing with an invoice. He exhaled hard. Can you not say it like that? Like what? Like the truth? I could hear office noise behind him, the muffled sound of printers, someone laughing too loudly, the normal rhythm of other people having ordinary evenings. Meanwhile, my husband was trying to negotiate tone while his mother stood somewhere in this town thinking she had just locked me out of my own home. Claire, he said, lower now. I told her not to make a scene. I felt something inside me go still. Not because I was surprised. Because I was not. You told her, I repeated. There was a pause. Just long enough. I did not tell her to change anything, he said. But I knew then. Maybe he had not handed her the screwdriver. Maybe he had not booked the locksmith. Maybe he had not stood on my porch smiling while she took liberties with my front door. But he had opened the window and called it weather. And sometimes betrayal does not sound like cruelty. Sometimes it sounds like a husband who knew enough to warn the wrong woman. For a moment, I said nothing. I just listened to Ethan breathing on the other end of the line, heard the faint rattle of his office air vent, the distant clink of someone setting down a coffee mug, all the harmless little sounds of a life continuing as if mine had not just been shoved sideways. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Where is she? Another pause. Too quick to be honest, too long to be innocent. Home, he said. Which home? I asked. Yours, or ours? Claire, please do not do this right now. I looked at the front door, at the new lock catching the last of the daylight, and felt an almost peaceful clarity settle over me. Men like Ethan always thought timing was the issue. Not the betrayal. Not the silence. Not the fact that his mother had turned my front porch into a boundary line. Just the timing. I am going to ask you once, I said. Is your mother inside my house? He lowered his voice the way people do when they want to sound reasonable instead of guilty. She just wanted to make sure things stayed calm until we could talk. I smiled then. A small, private smile that had nothing to do with happiness. Stayed calm. As if I were the storm. As if Diane had not marched a locksmith up my steps in broad daylight and replaced the hardware on a house she did not own. As if the problem was not what they had done, but whether I would react in a way that made them uncomfortable. I turned away from Linda for a moment and walked down the porch steps, slow and steady, heels clicking against the concrete path, because standing still suddenly felt too much like permission. Let me help you, Ethan, I said. There is no calm. There is your mother inside a property she has no legal right to enter, and there is you on the phone trying to soften the edges of what she did because you have spent your entire life confusing avoidance with peace. He inhaled sharply. Claire, do not make threats. I laughed, and this time it came out warm enough to sound almost kind. I have not even started. Linda, still standing a few feet away, pretended to inspect a flower bed that did not need inspecting. I appreciated her for that. Some humiliations are easier to survive when they are witnessed by someone who knows how to look away. Ethan tried again, voice tight now. Can you just wait until I get there? We can sit down and figure this out together. Together. There was that word. The one he used whenever he wanted me to carry half the weight of a decision he had already made without me. I thought of every time Diane had inserted herself into our marriage with his silent blessing. Every holiday she rewrote. Every plan she adjusted. Every room she entered without knocking. Every time I was asked to be flexible, understanding, gracious, mature. Funny how those words only ever moved in one direction. No, I said quietly. You and your mother already had your meeting. You made your decision while I was at work. Now I am making mine. He said my name, softer this time, the way he used to when he wanted me to bend. Claire. But the spell of that voice had been broken long before tonight. I ended the call before he could say anything else. The screen went black in my hand, reflecting my own face back at me in the deepening dusk. My hair was still pinned neatly from work. My lipstick had faded. My expression looked calmer than I felt. Maybe that was why Diane had always underestimated me. She thought composure meant weakness. She thought quiet women did not have hard edges. She thought because I did not slam doors, I would not know how to close one. I turned back toward the house, opened the camera app again, and this time I did not watch the front door. I pulled up the full access map for the property. Every sensor. Every entry point. Every lock connected to the system. And that was when I saw it. Diane had changed the decorative deadbolt on the front entry. The old brass one Ethan never even used. The real smart lock, the one tied to the internal security panel and side access, had not been touched at all. I stared at the screen for a full second, then another, and felt the kind of calm that only comes when a disaster turns out to be someone else's mistake. Diane had changed the wrong lock. Not almost the wrong one. Not technically the wrong one. The wrong one. The old decorative deadbolt on the front door was mostly cosmetic, a leftover from the previous owners who loved polished brass and symmetry more than function. Ethan used the garage half the time. I used the side entry almost every day because it opened straight into the mudroom, where I could kick off my heels, drop my tote on the bench, and breathe for 5 quiet minutes before dinner. 2 years ago, after a package theft on the next block, I had upgraded the real access points myself. New smart locks. New panel. New codes. New permissions. Diane, in all her confidence, had marched a locksmith to the one part of the house that looked important to someone who believed appearances were the same thing as control. I opened the security app fully and checked each access point in order. Side door, active. Mudroom entry, active. Garage override, active. Internal alarm panel, connected. User permissions, mine, full access. Ethan, limited residential. Temporary service code, expired. There it was, glowing back at me in neat little rows, the digital proof that my mother-in-law had just spent money to perform a very expensive misunderstanding. Linda took one look at my face and lowered her voice. What is it? I turned the screen toward her. She squinted, then blinked twice. Does that mean what I think it means? It means, I said, suddenly almost amused, that she changed jewelry, not armor. Linda let out a small, scandalized laugh and pressed her gloved hand to her mouth. Oh my goodness. I looked back at the house, and for the first time since I had stepped onto the porch, I stopped feeling locked out. Diane thought she had made a statement. In reality, she had left me a receipt. Because the lock was only the first mistake. The second one was older. Much older. And much more expensive. Diane had always spoken about the house as if it belonged to Ethan by default. Her son. Her bloodline. Her family name over the mailbox. She had never bothered to ask how we bought it. She had simply assumed the way women like Diane always assume, that marriage meant whatever belonged to the husband would eventually be managed by the mother who never learned to let go. But the down payment had not come from Ethan. Not really. His salary helped with the mortgage, yes. The monthly bills, yes. The lawn service he insisted on because he hated mowing, yes. But the foundation of that house, the reason we had been able to buy on Maple Glen instead of renting a condo downtown, came from me. From my grandmother's trust. From an inheritance I received when Nana Louise passed, money I kept separate because my father had taught me that love and paperwork should never be enemies. Rachel Coleman, my attorney, had handled every line of it. The trust. The contribution. The title structure. The occupancy clauses. All of it. Ethan knew enough to sign where he was told. Diane knew nothing at all. Which meant the woman now sitting somewhere inside my kitchen, probably drinking tea from the mug she once called tacky, was not just trespassing emotionally. She was standing on the wrong side of legal reality. My phone was already in my hand before the thought fully formed. I scrolled past Ethan's name without a second glance and tapped Rachel Coleman's number. She answered on the third ring, crisp and steady as ever. Claire? Everything all right? I looked at my front porch, at the new brass deadbolt catching the porch light like a cheap medal pin to a losing uniform, and smiled. That depends, I said. How much trouble can someone get into for locking themselves inside a house they do not understand? Rachel did not laugh. That was one of the reasons I paid her what I did. While most people would have treated my question like a punchline, she treated it like a file number. I could hear her keyboard in the background, fast and efficient, the soft click of someone who had spent 20 years turning other people's chaos into billable clarity. Start from the top, she said. I gave her the clean version. I came home from work. My key did not fit. Doorbell footage showed Diane arriving with a locksmith at 12:42. Ethan knew enough to call me nervous but not enough to sound surprised. The front decorative deadbolt had been replaced, but the actual smart entry points and internal access controls were still active. Linda Parker across the street had seen the whole thing. Rachel was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Do not confront her at the front door. Do not argue on the porch. Do not accuse anyone of anything dramatic. You have 3 stronger things than emotion right now: evidence, access, and title." I leaned against the porch column, the painted wood cool at my shoulder. That sounded like Rachel. Most people reached for adjectives in a crisis. She reached for nouns. Is she trespassing? I asked. Potentially, yes, Rachel said. Especially if she entered without the legal occupant's permission and interfered with access. More importantly, if she hired a locksmith to alter the entry hardware without authority, that creates a very clean record of intent. Keep every alert. Save the footage. Photograph the lock. If the locksmith left packaging, do not touch it yet. And Claire? Her voice sharpened slightly. Do not use the front door. Use your authorized point of entry. Let the facts do the humiliating. I looked at the porch steps, at the empty deadbolt box still tilted in the trash bin like a confession too lazy to hide. Linda was close enough now to hear my side of the conversation but far enough to pretend she was not. She gave me a tiny nod when I met her eyes, the universal suburban sign for I saw it and I will testify if I have to. I crouched, careful not to disturb anything, and snapped photos. The new brass lock. The open packaging. The screw still glinting in the bin. Then I pulled up the doorbell footage and saved 3 versions to cloud storage, just in case. Diane had always underestimated how dangerous a quiet woman with automatic backups could be. My phone buzzed with another message from Ethan. Please do not escalate this. I almost admired the nerve. Not because it was bold. Because it was so predictable. Men like Ethan always called accountability and escalation when it finally arrived at their own address. Rachel was still speaking. I am emailing you the title summary now. If anyone inside that house says it belongs to Ethan, they are operating on fantasy. The trust contribution remains separate property. The occupancy structure gives you lawful access and standing. If you need me, I am here. But my professional advice? Go in through the side door, and if Diane says one foolish thing on camera, let her. The email hit my inbox before she finished the sentence. I opened it and saw exactly what I expected. Clean lines. Legal language. My name where it mattered most. Not because I was sentimental. Because years ago, my father had looked me dead in the eye when the trust paperwork was first drafted and said, never let love be the only thing standing between you and your front door. I thanked Rachel, ended the call, and slipped my phone into my coat pocket. Then I picked up my tote, stepped off the porch, and walked down the side path lined with boxwoods toward the mudroom entrance. The little side keypad glowed soft blue in the evening light, calm as a heartbeat. Behind me, the front of the house still looked like Diane had won something. Ahead of me, the real entrance was waiting for the one person who actually had the right to use it. I entered my code, heard the soft electronic click, and opened the mudroom door with the same hand that had packed Ethan's lunch that morning. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and whatever expensive candle Diane always claimed gave her headaches. For one absurd second, everything looked normal. My rain boots were lined up beneath the bench. My beige trench coat still hung on the wall hook. The grocery list I had written the night before sat under the ceramic bowl by the door, my handwriting neat and practical. It was the kind of ordinary domestic detail that makes betrayal feel even more obscene. Someone had tried to remove me from my own life, and the basil on the list still needed replacing. I closed the door behind me quietly and did not call out. No reason to announce myself to a woman who had already mistaken stealth for superiority. Instead, I stepped into the kitchen and found her exactly where I knew I would. Diane Bennett was sitting at my kitchen island, posture perfect, ankles crossed, my white ceramic mug in her hand. Not one of the plain mugs. Mine. The one with the gold rim that Ethan once said was too delicate for daily use. She had set her oversized handbag on the counter beside a folder, a pair of reading glasses, and what looked very much like a typed list. Of course she brought a list. Women like Diane never improvise when they are planning to erase someone. She looked up at the sound of my heels and went still. Not startled. Not ashamed. Just briefly confused, as if she were seeing an optical illusion that contradicted the story she had already decided to believe. "Claire," she said slowly, rising from the stool. "How did you get in?" I set my tote bag on the mudroom bench, took off my coat, folded it once, and hung it on the hook. I wanted every movement to be unhurried. Deliberate. Theatrical in the quietest possible way. Then I turned and looked at her. Through my door, Diane. Her lips parted. For the first time since I had known her, she did not have a sentence ready. I walked farther into the kitchen and let my eyes drift over the counter. There was a legal pad with bullet points written in her sharp, slanted handwriting. Utilities. Forwarding address. Closet pickup. Guest room inventory. She had not just planned an intrusion. She had planned an extraction. My extraction. "You should not be here," she said at last, recovering enough to square her shoulders. The statement was almost funny coming from a woman standing in my kitchen with a Locksmith receipt still warm in the trash outside. I leaned one hand against the back of a dining chair and smiled. "That depends on what you think this house is." Her jaw tightened. "Ethan and I agreed it would be best if you took some time away until things settled." There it was. The royal we. The oldest trick in her playbook. Borrow Ethan's name, speak in plural, call cruelty stability. I tilted my head. "Did Ethan tell you to replace the decorative front deadbolt?" Her eyes flickered. Only for a second, but I saw it. Confusion. She had not expected me to know which lock she had touched. She had expected outrage, not specifics. She had expected tears, not terminology. I let the silence stretch until it belonged to me. Then I walked to the island, lifted my phone, and turned the screen toward her. The access map glowed bright between us. Front decorative deadbolt, newly replaced. Side entry, active. Mudroom access, active. Garage override, active. Internal panel, connected. Full owner permissions, Claire Bennett. Diane stared at it, and something beautiful happened. Her certainty cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a fine, hairline fracture. Running through the center of her expression. "You changed the wrong lock," I said softly. Then I let my gaze drop to the folder beside her handbag, the little list she had written for the life she thought she was about to reorganize. And you may have made a much bigger mistake than that. Diane blinked once, then twice, the way people do when reality refuses to line up with the script they have rehearsed. For a woman who had spent years speaking in polished certainties, silence looked strangely unnatural on her. It did not last long. She set my mug down with careful precision, as if controlling the placement of porcelain might restore control over the room. "Do not be dramatic, Claire," she said, lifting her chin. "Ethan told me enough." "Enough," I repeated. That was generous of him. Her mouth tightened. "This marriage has been unstable for months. You know that. He needs space, and frankly, this house has become a source of tension." I almost admired the packaging. Not the cruelty itself. The wrapping. Diane never called anything what it was. She did not say intrusion. She said intervention. She did not say betrayal. She said transition. She did not say I am trying to push you out of your own home. She said space. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it face up on the island between us. Rachel's email was still open. Title summary. Trust contribution. Occupancy rights. My name exactly where it mattered. "You should read that before you say another word," I said. Diane did not touch the phone. Women like her hated documents when the documents did not admire them. "I already know this house belongs to my son," she said. I smiled. "No, Diane. You know what you assumed. Those are not the same thing." Before she could answer, the front door rattled hard enough to echo through the entry hall. Once. Then again. Then Ethan's voice, muffled and irritated, carried through the house. "Claire? Mom? The front lock is not working." I turned my head toward the foyer and let the moment breathe. It was almost too perfect. Diane heard it too. The tiny hitch in her breathing. The absurdity settling in all at once. She had changed the one lock that now kept her own son. Standing outside the house she thought she had secured for him. I looked back at her. That would be the decorative deadbolt you had replaced. She did not answer. The front handle jiggled again. Ethan's voice came sharper this time. "Claire, open the door." I stayed exactly where I was. "No," I said calmly, loud enough for him to hear through the hall. "Use your garage remote." Another pause. Then, after a few seconds, the distant mechanical hum of the garage door rolling up. He had a remote because of course he did. Limited access. Familiar routines. Half a husband, half a tenant. Diane's eyes narrowed. "You are enjoying this," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said honestly. "I am understanding it. There is a difference." Ethan came in through the laundry entry, footsteps quick, tie loosened, suit jacket half off one shoulder like he had run the last 10 yards from the driveway. He stopped the second he saw us standing in the kitchen, the phone on the island, the folder beside Diane's bag, the legal pad with her little eviction fantasy written in blue ink. His eyes went first to me, then to his mother, then to the access map still glowing on the screen. He looked like a man who had spent the whole drive home hoping 2 lies might somehow become a misunderstanding if he arrived fast enough. "Claire," he started. I lifted one hand. "Not yet." His mouth closed. "Good. For once." I slid Rachel's email toward him, then tapped the screen once with my fingertip. "Read it. Then read your mother's list. Then decide whether you want to keep pretending this was about peace." Ethan looked down, and I watched the exact second his face changed. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then the first thin line of panic. Because some truths do not arrive like thunder. Some arrive in 12-point font with your wife's name sitting exactly where your mother thought yours would be. Ethan read the first page twice. I could tell because his eyes hit the same paragraph, stopped, moved back up, and tracked it again with the helpless focus of a man realizing the story he had been living inside was not the one written on paper. His face drained slowly, not with drama, but with the quiet horror of delayed understanding. The trust contribution remained separate property. Occupancy rights remain in favor of Claire Bennett. Alteration of access without authorization may constitute unlawful interference. He swallowed, looked at his mother, then at the legal pad beside her handbag. Utilities. Forwarding address. Closet pickup. Guest room inventory. His shoulders sagged by half an inch. "Mom," he said, and there was something in his voice I had not heard in years. Not obedience. Not appeasement. Embarrassment. Diane drew herself up straighter, like posture alone could win a legal argument. "I was helping," she said crisply. "This has gone too far, and someone needed to step in." Ethan looked at her list again, then at the front hallway, then back at me. "Claire, I did not know she was doing all this." I held his gaze and let the silence force him to sit in his own sentence. That was the problem with Ethan. He always believed not knowing the full extent of a betrayal made him innocent. As if neglect were a virtue. As if leaving a door unlocked for someone else to walk through was somehow cleaner than opening it yourself. "You knew enough," I said. "Enough to warn her. Enough to call me and ask me not to escalate. Enough to let your mother treat my home like a waiting room while she planned my exit." Diane snapped, "That is unfair." I turned to her, finally. "No, Diane. Unfair was hiring a locksmith at lunchtime and sitting in my kitchen with an eviction checklist written on my stationery." Ethan closed his eyes for a second, then rubbed a hand over his face. The gesture was so familiar it almost made me sad. Almost. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The question landed in the room like a confession. Not "what should we do?" Not "how do we fix this?" "What do you want me to do?" Because for the first time all evening, he understood the balance had shifted. I did not answer right away. Instead, I walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out the small envelope where I kept the spare key cards for the internal system, and set one on the island. Then I picked up the second card, the one Diane had no idea existed, and slipped it into my purse. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. "Your mother is leaving tonight. She is not taking a mug, a folder, or one opinion with her. Her spare key to the old front deadbolt is now decorative, just like the lock she paid to replace. Her access to this house is over." Diane opened her mouth, but I lifted a hand and she stopped. Not because I frightened her. Because certainty had finally abandoned her. I turned back to Ethan. "Tomorrow morning, I am having the entire front assembly replaced properly by a locksmith I choose. The invoice will be paid from our joint household account, and if your mother has a problem with that, she can explain it to my attorney. You are going to tell her that yourself. And after that?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked around my kitchen. The gold-rimmed mug. The grocery list. The bench by the mudroom. The ordinary little kingdom I had built with care while other people mistook my calm for surrender. After that, I said, "You and I are going to discuss whether there is still a marriage here once your mother is no longer standing in the middle of it." Diane's face hardened, then faltered when Ethan did not rush to defend her. That was the true ending, not the paperwork, not the lock, not even the humiliation. It was the silence. The absence of his reflex. For once, he did not choose her quickly enough. I stepped aside and pointed toward the front hall. "Use the garage if you want," I told Diane. "The front door is mostly for appearances." She left 10 minutes later without another word. Ethan followed her to the driveway, shoulders bent, carrying her oversized handbag like the cost of every excuse he had ever made. I stayed inside, standing in the kitchen under the soft pendant lights, and listened to the garage door close behind them. Then I opened the security app, removed Diane Bennett from every old access note I had ever stored, updated the system name, and changed one line in the custom settings to something only I would ever see when the lock's engaged for the night. Home secured. Owner inside.